Hey everyone, Anthony Sequeira here, and it is time for a review of the newest CCNA exam. And I don't usually timestamp my videos, but this one I did timestamp. Notice it's August 28th, 2024, and this is the version 1.1 of the CCNA exam that I just saw. I'm timestamping this because I think this exam will continue to get modifications, and that's going to become real obvious why I think that real soon in this video. But let's get started with this exam review, and I wanted to start with the basics. So there were 89 questions total in my latest CCNA exam. That was a shocker for me. The most questions I seem to remember in previous iterations of the CCNA were like between 60 and 70. So it told me up front that I would get 89 total questions, and that was a shocker right away before I even clicked let's go with the first question. Something else that was interesting is they also told me, and I loved this, they told me there'd be 89 questions total, and then they told me that there would be 3 simulations, they called them. Notice I'm calling them emulations. More on that later on. And that was a great, great subtle thing they did for us. So now I know how many of those simulation type questions I'm going to face during this exam. They did not do that in previous CCNA exams. They would just tell you how many total questions you're about to face. And that made it pretty difficult to manage time because these simulations are randomly appearing as you go throughout the exam. And really, that was a time management kind of burden. So I love that I knew going in 89 total questions, 3 total simulations. 2 hours was the duration. And I've got to tell you something, as you might guess, I am a super, super fast test taker when it comes to something like a CCNA exam. When you've taken dozens of them at this point or something, like at least, I know I've taken it over 10 times. So when you've taken something like this a lot and you teach it all the time and you're entrenched in it and you write books in it, as you would expect, I go through this thing very, very quickly. I only had about 20 minutes left when I was done. So for my students out there, you want to be quick, really know your stuff, and don't take a lot of time with the multiple choice questions would be my feedback. As far as time pressure goes, I really do think it exists on this CCNA exam. Something else about that too, keep in mind that a lot of these questions, as I'm about to describe to you, are very much focused on configurations, and that means a lot of the multiple choice are going to have kind of complex exhibits. So you're dealing with a lot of information as you go throughout this CCNA exam, and that's where time is going to be a pressure, I think. Okay, remember, there's no going backwards. So this is one of those exam styles where when you click next, that's it. You're not going to be able to go back and revisit that question. That's a real big bummer because the way the CCNA works, the way this exam works is a lot of questions would answer other questions. And I suppose that's the main reason why you can't go back and forth. You can comment on a question, which is giving Cisco feedback, but I never do that. You probably never do it either. All right, so those are the basics. Now let's get into what a lot of you are concerned about, I'm sure, and that is what are the emphasis as far as the content goes of this thing. It's a very large blueprint that you can see I'm sharing with us here, and a lot of students with this version 1.1 are saying, all right, what's going to be the emphasis? Well, the emphasis as far as this block of content goes, was definitely on controllers. And what was really funny about that was DNA Center was mentioned several times. That's curious because with this version 1.1 exam, Cisco was stating that they would be referring to that as the Catalyst Center, its new name. Oh no, I got questions that said specifically Cisco DNA Center. So I really do believe that Cisco is still working on this exam, and I think they're going to always work on it. In other words, they're going to consistently be introducing new questions into the test bank of questions, and I think we'll eventually see the reference to DNA Center go away and it be called its new Catalyst Center name. But like I said, I did not see that in this test. I saw plenty of mention of DNA Center. Definitely know your 2-tier and your 3-tier for your network topologies. And then you're going to notice a trend here. The areas of focus for content on this exam very much have to do with configuration, verification, and troubleshooting. So sure enough, identifying issues with cables became a heavily tested thing. Classically, comparing TCP to UDP was a big deal on this test. And of course, the configuration of IPv4, including subnetting, is an emphasis. But let me state that Cisco is really clever about this. Gone are those days when Cisco would give you like 15 subnetting questions on your test. And they were, it was just straight up subnetting, like, what's the last usable address if your network and subnet are this? They're not really doing that anymore. What they're doing is being clever. They're working subnetting into simulation, so configuration of stuff, and they're just being clever about you needing subnetting knowledge, but not just asking a direct subnetting question. So pretty clever. Okay, configuring and verifying IPv6. Sure. Anytime you see configure, verify, or troubleshoot in this blueprint, I want you realizing this is going to be an emphasis. Verifying IP parameters for client OSs. Now, notice I've got just 2 things highlighted in this section of content. Did that mean I got no questions on describing wireless principles? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it wasn't an area of emphasis. So one of the things I'm trying to do here is highlight things for you where, yeah, you're not going to see just one question. You're going to get hammered on it a bit with multiple questions. Also, keep in mind, as I've alluded to, I really do think this test bank is going to be continued to be worked on. All right, what else? Well, configure and verify VLANs. Of course, this was hugely emphasized. Configure and verify inter-switch connectivity, hugely emphasized. Configure and verify layer 2 discovery protocols, huge emphasis. Configuring Ether channel, huge emphasis. I sound like a broken record. Root port, root bridge, other port names, and port fast were the emphasis on the rapid per VLAN spanning tree protocol plus section. Notice, no big emphasis on a new addition to version 1.1, root guard, loop guard, BPDU filter, BPDU guard. I think those questions are coming. I just think Cisco is still hard at work vetting new questions for us. What else? Anything involving wireless architectures, including the wireless LAN controller, is an emphasis. So just do due diligence and learn as much as you can when it comes to wireless LAN controllers and their access points. Please just learn as much as you can. It is a big emphasis in this test. So interpreting the wireless LAN GUI configuration for client connectivity, this is a huge area. Identifying the components of a routing table. If you can't do that, you have no business taking this test. Determining how routers make forwarding decisions was a very popular area in this test. If you can't do that with a large complex example, don't take this test. Also, configuring IPv4 and IPv6 static routing. Big time. all those components: host route, floating static, network, default, know it all. Know everything you possibly can about OSPF version 2's configuration. No surprise, this is a big emphasis. And if I were you, I would be thinking of that from a troubleshooting perspective, okay? Don't just straight up think, all right, it's going to be asking me to config. Troubleshooting should be a part of that, like I experienced as well. Configure and verify inside source NAT, big time. NTP, configure and verify, yep. Notice a huge emphasis on configure and verify DHCP client and relay, configure network devices for remote access with SSH, configure and verify access control using local passwords. That's always trickier than I think it's going to be, by the way. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and a lot of times I have to pause and go, oh, wait a minute. How do you configure the password to make this and that happen? Configure and verify access control lists, configure and verify layer 2 security features, describe wireless security protocols. Again, anything involving wireless gets a big emphasis. Configure and verify the wireless LAN within the GUI using WPA2 pre-shared keys. By the way, do you notice that one is so specific? It makes it pretty darn easy. So that's a great one there. All right, wrapping it up with the automation and programmability section, we've got anything to do with controllers is emphasized. So compare traditional networks with controller-based networking, big time emphasis, and describe controller-based software-defined architectures, overlay, underlay fabric, separation of control plane, northbound APIs, southbound APIs. That is all a big emphasis. And the recognizing of JSON. No JSON, backwards, forwards, inside and out. It is not that hard at all. It's actually really fun to study and learn JSON. I think at least, I hope you do as well. So get really good with identifying all the aspects of the JSON data representation format. Notice, no emphasis in my draw of questions on AI. So for people panicking about the AI content in the new CCNA, my advice to you is take the exam as soon as you can, because I don't think those questions have been introduced yet. If they had, I just got the luck of the draw and did not see any. So pretty amazing how the new content areas for version 1.1 have not been an emphasis thus far. Well, now that we've talked about the areas of emphasis, I want to go ahead and break down the question types that you will see in this exam. Sure enough, we have the classic, and this is the question type that you will see the most of in your new CCNA exam. It's the pick one multiple choice. I know how you love seeing practice questions, so I decided to go ahead and make practice questions for this demonstration. Your organization is considering the collapse core design for its network. What layer from the classic 3-layer design is not impacted? Notice there are circles next to each of the options. That's my visual clue that this is a pick one multiple choice style. And of course, the answer here is the access layer. Notice how you could always argue with the questions. I mean, is the access layer not impacted if you decide on a collapsed core? Well, it kind of is impacted, but you're always looking for what Cisco would think is the best answer, and the best answer in this case is the access layer. I could argue against that, but it's the access layer is what's correct here. Also notice on this one, the distribution layer, some people call the policy layer. And if you knew that little fact, you would know that that can't be the right answer because you have two synonyms there. There's no way to distinguish between C and D, and you can only pick one. So that can't be, those two can't be the right answer. Little kind of exam tip there that I often look for when I'm taking tests. Okay, so there's your pick one multiple choice style. Like I said, this is the bulk of your questions. Then we have the pick multiple choice style. Notice you're going to see checkboxes, and that's your immediate cue that, oh, more than one is correct. And here's the great news. Cisco has stuck with this in the CCNA exam. They don't do the more difficult style of choose all that apply. Whew. Choose all that apply. Those can be very tricky with your Cisco exams. So with other exams, this one does not do that. It's always going to tell you choose 2 or choose 3 or choose 4. It won't say choose all that apply. So sample question, you're configuring some access ports in the HQ portion of your network. Which statements are true? Choose 2. You can configure a data VLAN or a voice VLAN. The default VLAN is VLAN 1. Use the switchport no negotiate command. Use the switchport mode access command. For those of you studied up in this area, you quickly see that, yep, the only two 100% true statements are the default VLAN is VLAN 1 and use the switchport mode access command. Great work if you tackled those two. Next up is drag and drop. There are two styles. There is a style where you will use all of the options. So here's an example. It's going to show us these terms on the left, and then it has these categories on the right, LACP, PAGP, static, and you will be using all of those things on the left. This is a little bit of an easier style. So you do your dragging and dropping, and of course it's active and passive for LACP, it's auto and desirable for PAGP, and then it is the on mode for the static configuration. Notice this one's a little easier because we're going to use every single one of those objects on the left. Next up, there is a style now where they're going to say, drag the objects from the left over to the right, and you won't be using all of them. Darn it! This is a little tougher. So here's an example. We've got southbound APIs and northbound APIs. So we drag over the components that coordinate and somebody gets left out. In this case, it was JSON. So southbound APIs are controller to devices, and OpenFlow would be an example of that. Northbound APIs are controller to applications, and REST APIs would be an example of that. Notice how this one might seem super tricky, but one big thing, if you know JSON, you know it's not an API, so right off the bat, this is way easier for you because you know JSON is the one thing that ain't like the others. One of these things is not like the others. Wow, that's a flashback to a children's programming item that I watched in the 1970s. Shows how old I am. Okay, so that's the other style of drag and drop you need to be ready for. Finally, the last question type is the emulations. Notice I've been calling it an emulation instead of a simulation. I was absolutely thrilled to see that the old Flash-based simulation technology is dead in CCNA. It's now an emulator. So when you click into the R1 window and you're doing configuration, it looks to me like it's iOS on Linux. It's an old technology for emulating a Cisco router or switch that they're using. Oh, this was such great news for me. It used to be in the old exams, I would do like show, run, interface, Ethernet 0/0, and it would just, that command wasn't available. This exam experience was so much better because I just sat there and was like trying every weird show command, debug, whatever I wanted, and it all was working because this is no longer a simulation, it's an emulation of the iOS. Such great news. Now, how this interface works, as you can see, is you've got 3 tabs on the left, and the 3 tabs on the left are your rules and your topology and your tasks. The rules set a bunch of stuff, all pretty meaningless to us, except for, and I believe they even bolded it, save your configs. So these are partial credit, just like they used to be before. And part of getting credit is remembering to save your configs. So be sure you do that. When you click on the next tab on the left-hand side, it's for the topology information. So any diagram or tables that you need are going to be displayed on that tab. And then finally, it's the tasks tab. And here would be an example. R3 has already been configured and you cannot access it. Configure R1 and R2 for OSPF area 0. Use a process ID of 100. Oh, darn you. They did that in this theoretical example I'm giving because we're so used to going router OSPF 1 that sure enough, we may do that by accident. Ensure that a DR and BDR is not used in the topology. So that's an example of the type of tasks that you might see. And then, of course, you're going to be clicking on R1, R2, R3 tabs to access those emulated devices and make the configurations. Notice that when you're in one of these emulations, you're going to be bouncing back and forth on the topology and tasks, topology and tasks. You're never needing to go back to that first tab. I don't think the first tab was called rules, by the way. It might have been called instructions or something, but whatever. I guarantee you're going to see that style. Some initial feedback information on the first tab that you're never going to need again as you're solving the emulation. That first tab information also never changed between my simulations. So the only thing I, was really focusing on in these emulations were the topology and the tasks tabs. All right, folks. So that's my review of your updated CCNA exam version 1.1, and I realize that you've probably got a ton of questions for me. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do a live stream on YouTube where I will be answering your questions. This live stream is going to run Saturday, August 31st, 2024. I can't believe we're already done with August. So Saturday, August 31st, 2024, it is at 10 a.m. We are in Eastern Daylight Time, or I am in Eastern Daylight Time. That's Universal Coordinated Time -4. So 10 a.m. live stream. And of course, that live stream, if you can't make it, that is going to be living on my YouTube channel, so you can revisit that. Be sure to subscribe so you can get notifications of events and content like this. And I want to thank you so much for joining me in this review of the very latest, greatest CCNA exam as of August 28th, 2024. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you all in the live stream.